And that's the reality, right? Abortions can fail, abortions can be stopped by women, and they can also be reversed through successful abortion pill reversal. And I think one of the things we as an organization wanted to make sure we discuss today is that what happens to a baby, right? What happens to a baby who survives an abortion like me? I survived a late-term abortion at 31 weeks. My medical record said 18 to 20 weeks on them. But in reality, my birth mom was probably 31 weeks pregnant with me. But we have this continued conversation happening where people say this doesn't happen and nobody really knows what happens to the baby. So let's talk about this from an OBGYN. What happens to that baby that survives an abortion? Are they provided prenatal care? What happens to them? Are there gaps in what we know? What would you speak into that?
Yeah. So Melissa, this is more secondhand information. I've never worked at a hospital that did abortions. But I think that all over the spectrum happens. Mm-hmm. But the most common story I hear is like, oh my gosh, this baby was born alive. Let's put it, in the room and just leave and let it die. Because without some type of assistance, they indeed are going to die. I want to just back up for a second and I think it's important people understand why I'm here today, why we're here today. And I delivered a baby most every day of my life for 25 years, over 5,000 babies. And I'm often asked, when was the favorite moment of that pregnancy, of the whole pregnancy, the delivery? And it was the moment I got to give that crying baby to mom and dad. Every baby, no matter how many I delivered, when it was delivered, I would quietly be saying a prayer as I was doing what needed to be done to make sure that baby was in good shape. And once it started crying, just to thank you, God, and hand that baby to the mom and dad was the closest I ever got to seeing what God was like. That a mom and dad had this agape love for this baby, a love that never ends. And I think that's why I'm here today. It's hard for me to imagine this world that you were born into. But you point out one theme I'm going to be talking about today is abortions being done without any idea how far along the mom really is. It's well documented when a woman would come see me, first time visit, that their dates were off 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, that was more the norm than the exception. Most women don't sit there and say, I ovulate the 12th of every month and I got pregnant on the 28th. You don't do that. So on average, they're off a month to 6 weeks, and that's why really ultrasounds are so important. Mm-hmm. And I know during the rest of the conversation, people are just so surprised when they deliver this baby they thought was going to not survive an abortion. It survives, and all of a sudden, the baby's 31 weeks, not 23 weeks. And they're not ready for the delivery. Even as many deliveries as I've done on that early pregnancy, you want a pediatrician, you want anesthesia in the room to assist with the breathing, all those things. But unfortunately, we live in a world, even though it's illegal, even though there's laws to say thou shalt not commit murder, that we're still murdering these babies by being passive.
Mm-hmm. And that leads us to, I think, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, and that is a bill that you obviously are a leader on, and we're so thankful for that. But do you want to speak into that a little bit today as well?
It's pretty simple. You wouldn't think that we wouldn't need a law like this. Again, that every baby born should be protected by the current laws of the land. But we saw this happening over and over again. And frankly, it was nurses, I think, that were in those delivery rooms, in these abortion rooms, that said, oh my gosh, I need some help here. The people that are doing this abortion are walking away, and they're leaving me, who don't have the skill sets to take care of this baby in the room. And by the way, that person doing the abortion certainly doesn't have the skill sets to take care of this high-risk delivery either. The folks that are typically doing abortions have limited skills on taking care and protecting life. They're typically, I'll just say, the folks that couldn't survive the real world of medicine unfortunately go into this other world for other reasons, mainly financial as well. So the Born Alivers Act would just codify this, what we should be doing is the right thing to protect the baby when it's born.
Mm-hmm. And we are grateful for your leadership on that. And I think you made an excellent point, which is there is no federal Born Alive bill. A lot of people get confused by that. They talk about the 2002 piece of the bill that was signed, right? It was just simply a statement, a definitions bill, that it didn't have any teeth whatsoever about what should happen after a baby survives an abortion and whether they're provided medical care. And I think sometimes we hear from people now, and I'm going to guess, Kristen, you might jump into this next after the senator's finished, but we sometimes now hear this argument that says, well, chemical abortions are happening at a higher frequency, and so babies aren't surviving abortions, right? This isn't a conversation that we need to even have, but I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that from even a medical provider's perspective about, what would you want a woman to know about the choices available to her?
Yeah. So of course the chemical abortions are exploding, and again, I've never prescribed those type of medications, but I've taken care of patients with the complications. As I try to go through all my math here, I think they're approved up to about 10 weeks. Well, what happens if the mom is really 14 weeks or 16 weeks and not 10 weeks? Well, the medication is not as effective. And what we really don't know is what type of problems it could cause for the baby. Is it going to cause a heart anomalies? Is it going to cause a neural tube? Well, we don't know, right? And then this mom thinks that she's not pregnant anymore. She's assumed that she's had the medicine, she had some bleeding, she thought that she had a miscarriage, the abortion, and indeed she has it. So she goes back to a lifestyle that might be harmful for the baby as well. So again, so important that that ultrasound is done as well. What really scares me about this is that this administration wants to allow people to administer this drug without ever seeing the patient. And again, I delivered 5,000 babies, but for me to put my hands on a woman who's 3 to 5 months pregnant is just a total guess. If you can imagine, not every woman has the same size of uterus when she's 8 weeks or 12 weeks. So that's why you need the sonogram again. But I'll defer to Kristen for a second, maybe.
Thank you. Well, and as you're handing that off to her, Senator, I'll just add a couple remarks that we are experiencing at the Abortion Survivors Network. We have always historically recognized within our survivor population, most of our survivors are not aborted because of a fetal anomaly. Their health issues and their disabilities, more often than not, are caused from the abortion procedure. We put out an awareness month in September so people can start to be educated about how babies survive abortions. And two of the stories that we shared were late-term abortion survivors. One is a soon-to-be 12-year-old named Milena, and Milena might be watching this now or later, and I know this will mean the world to her to know that we are having a conversation about this. But Milena survived an abortion at 28 weeks in Serbia. Now, in her case, she was targeted for an abortion because mom was given a poor prenatal diagnosis. Yet she survived that late-term abortion and is thriving. I'm probably going to her birthday party soon. So, I mean, how cool. This little girl gets to have a birthday because the abortion failed to take her life. But the other story that we shared in videos as well was from a woman named Lauren who's in Georgia. And her mother started a late-term abortion, had gone many places to get an abortion, time after time. The gestation was off, and when she finally had the abortion, started the procedure and was needing to go back the second day to complete it, and was able, dad intervened. She didn't go back for the final step of the abortion procedure, and that's how that woman is now in her 40s, the parent of 3 incredible sons. And these are the stories about late-term abortion and those dynamics that most people don't understand.
I'm going to let the ladies speak for a second, if that's okay. I want to hear their story, and you can come back to me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Senator. The gameplay by the abortion lobby, I was on the UNC Chapel Hills campus yesterday debating with students for hours about abortion. It plays out with our young people and how we talk about abortion. We talk about everything other than what actually happens in abortion. We use euphemisms like choice and healthcare, access, and now freedom is the word du jour from the abortion lobby, but they don't actually want to talk about abortions, how they're happening, and the fact that we do know that babies do survive their intended death sentence. The children are born who had a death date. If you've been monitoring what corporate abortion and their lobby has been saying for the past couple months, it's been, I think, quite interesting, where we are hearing late-term abortions don't exist, but if they do, and then, without taking a breath, but if they do, it's only in rare cases. But we know, these talking points are not facts. And to be honest with you, facts are very hard to come by because we don't even have a national abortion reporting law in our country. We get to cobble data together from the CDC. States like California don't even report their abortion data to the CDC. Or we have to use the Abortion Lobbies Institute, the Guttmacher Institute, named after the second president of Planned Parenthood and the VP of the American Eugenics Society, Alan Guttmacher, to cobble together data about what actually happens in an abortion. The picture of abortion is also always painted by abortionists themselves. But if we do look at what the data we do have in 2020, the CDC reported that 9 in 10 abortions took place in the first trimester, right? So that's 93% of abortions. That leaves, though, 7% of children who are being killed later in pregnancy. These 7% of children, the 14, 20 weeks, and even later. I was on a campus. Okay, so now you're telling me to use the mic. Wait, just tell me not to use the mic. And now, okay, I will use the mic. All right. I'm getting mixed signals. Do you want me to use the mic or not?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. All right. In 2020, we know it's 7% of abortions that take place later in pregnancy. People tell us that it's impossible. It can't exist. No way that's existing. Last week, I was on the University of New Mexico in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Within 2 minutes, I called Solve Care, an abortion facility a few miles here from Capitol Hill, and scheduled an abortion for 34 weeks. Was any question asked about, did I have any health issues? No. Was there any questions about fetal demise or an adverse, diagnosis of the child? No. The only question that was asked in my intake, and I did this, by the way, in front of 50 college students who were screaming at me, the only question that was asked of me was how big the child was and could I send an ultrasound of my child because they needed to guesstimate how much it was going to cost to end the life of my child. That was the only reason. Our laws, when we pass laws that permit abortion, do not say that you can't have an abortion because you just don't want your child, or your child may be considered an inconvenience, or your partner is pressuring you to have an abortion, which we know from the data that we do have. More than 70% of women who seek abortions say they were coerced to have their abortions. Lack of partner support, lack of family support, financial issues. So we're talking about 7% of children. According to the CDC numbers and the 627,000 abortions that we know took place in 2020, that's 1% of children we know are aborted after the 20-week mark. That's 682 babies.
And that would have been me.
That would have been you, Melissa. I mean, you think about the tragedy we saw in Israel a couple weeks ago. The dozens of babies who were killed. We think about when our children are shot in schools and how every life is precious and we mourn every single child's life that's taken. These innocent children's taken from acts of violence and terrorism. And then we have a discussion about abortion and we look at the data that we have and we say, well, at least 687 children are being aborted every year after 20 weeks, after they could survive outside the womb, given medical technology. And then we're told, oh, it doesn't matter. That's not enough. That's no reason to pass a Born Alive Infant Protection Act because it would limit women's rights to access. That's wrong. And we should be adult enough to be able to have a conversation about these children and about how their lives matter, just like how all of our children's lives matter. And we need to actually have actual facts. Mm-hmm. And so I'm excited for this, hopefully getting this piece of legislation passed, because this should be common sense. Mm-hmm. It should be common sense. Every person, pro-life, pro-choice, Democrat, Republican, Independent, should agree that passing a Born Alive Infant Protection Act, caring for babies who are born alive, who are breathing, gasping for air, they should get medical care. They deserve medical care because they're like us. They're human beings who are born with dignity and value and made in the image of a creator, like all of us.
If you could say one statement, Kristen, sum it up in one statement of why is it important for us to talk about and educate about late-term abortion in particular?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important because a majority of people recognize the child later in pregnancy. And they understand. They've seen the 3D and 4D ultrasounds of their brothers and sisters or their nieces and nephews in the womb. We're not talking about Because I often hear on campuses of like, well, if it doesn't look like me, it doesn't have value, which, by the way, is a completely discriminatory thing to say, and it's very scary that anyone would ever actually admit that. But they admitted that yesterday. Well, it didn't look like me. When we can show the window to the womb, show these children, when we demonstrate stories of children who are, born premature and survived, I think it changes just the entire abortion discussion of what is it? What is actually abortion doing? It's a violent ending of a unique human life, of a precious child. And I think that redefines the whole conversation away from these euphemisms of choice and access and healthcare, because they don't ever want to talk about what abortion really is or what it really does.
Well, can I jump in on there real quick, if you don't mind, as well? I think that this, we want to talk a little bit more about this late-term abortion issue right now. Probably 80% of Americans believe that late-term abortion is wrong. And the whole sanctity of life issue is certainly, it's complicated to say the very, very least, but 80% of Americans believe that late-term abortion is wrong. But every Democrat senator has voted in favor of late-term abortion up till the moment of birth, and would then turn their back on this baby that survived that abortion. And Americans need to realize that as this debate goes forward, that there's a disregard for the sanctity of life by my colleagues across the aisle.
I'm sad that you have to bring that up, but I'm grateful that you bring that up, because we know that to be true. We read about it, we hear about it. I have faced members of Congress who have expressed that to me, right? Essentially, it is well, we're talking about everybody but you. And if we're being intellectually honest, Kristen, right, that leads to the answers about the humanity of every preborn child. Kristen, I'm wondering if I can pass one more question to you specifically before we turn to Melanie, but it's kind of a two-pronged question. Based on your phone call there in New Mexico recently, and when you're talking about how people really, right, when we think about a baby and a late-term abortion, we know the conceptualization of a baby, right, which shows us the humanity of babies throughout, right, earlier gestation. But I think we need to talk about that one in particular, because what would have happened at that abortion procedure in New Mexico?
Well, good thing I just came from a college campus. I have my education materials.
Y'all, I did not know that.
Okay. I had the needles somewhere in my purse, but it's okay. So this is a fetal model of a child about, they say 20 weeks, I say about 22 weeks. I don't know, what do you think, doctor?
Open?
Eyes closed.
Yeah, probably 22 weeks.
22 weeks. There you go. Okay. So I had a doctor's opinion. See. Okay. So after about 21 weeks, we know from undercover footage from our friends at the Center for Medical Progress, Planned Parenthood abortionists say that the skull of the child is too difficult to grasp within the SOFR clamp and to crush. The one abortionist in the video was bragging about how she had really great muscles in her arms from doing that. So the typical abortion that's being used now in these late-term abortions is a digoxin abortion. We call it a heart attack abortion because that's what it does. A long needle is inserted into a mother's abdomen using ultrasound guided technology. Digoxin is inserted into the womb, into the child, and the goal is to cause a cardiac arrest. Lumeria is inserted, her cervix is ripened, and she's told to return back to the abortion facility 2 to 3 days later, and if all has gone to plan, the child will be delivered dead without a beating heart.
And I can tell you we have survivors who have survived dioxygen
Absolutely.
shots to the heart.
Yeah, because as the doctor said and Senator said, some of those abortionists aren't really, they are at the top level of the medical tier. And so they make a lot of mistakes that kill women, and we need more of these mistakes where they actually don't kill the child either. And so this is what happens. These are heart attack abortions. And this is interesting when we're on campus, Melissa. The question always comes about the life of the mother. What happens with the life of the mother? And I think maybe the senator might want to talk about that. But what condition would a woman have, Senator, that would require you to cause a cardiac arrest, wait 2 to 3 days, and then deliver a dead child? Is there any condition that a pregnant woman may be facing, a life-threatening condition, which we know happens, that would say this type of procedure is the way to solve that?
You know, again, I've been through 5,000 deliveries, and never had to do an abortion or recommend an abortion because of the life of the mother. That in today's world, we were always able to say both. And, you know, thank goodness. Thank God for the skills that he's given us as well. So I think that would be, you know, just very, very, very rare for that situation to exist. And again, why, what new medical condition, they're typically pre-existing conditions is my point, that they knew before they got pregnant. They knew when they were 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And again, life is precious from the time of conception in my heart. But I just don't know why was the delay going on there. It would just be very, very, very rare event.
And you would just deliver the child. You know, if the mother no longer can safely gestate a child, from OBs that I've worked with and we've talked with the medical schools, you deliver the child.
Yeah, typically we're able to get this baby, you know, we get this baby 4, 5, 6 more weeks. And again, this is a decision with mom, the doctor. Most of us have a pastor in that room, family support saying every situation is unique. But
You induce labor with the intent to save both
absolutely
mother and
right.
baby.
So we get the baby at 25, 26 weeks, and then the baby's got a 95% chance of living happily ever after.
Thank you. Melanie, I want to turn our attention to you for a little bit. I love to hear from you about policy and reporting, and I think in the midst of that, we need to identify even gaps in reporting. So Kristen's already talked a little bit about that, but I think you can probably elaborate on that a little bit further. When you look at the current landscape on policy issues regarding life, what do you see in terms of what do we know, what don't we know, what gaps exist, how do we start to fill them, how does that lead to policy?
Yeah, you know, in so much of this debate, we have a believability factor being a huge problem, a barrier to people really understanding that this is not a solution in search of a problem. It's an enormous problem that needs a solution. And so when we look at this landscape, and Kristen touched on that, we don't have a great national abortion reporting standard. Just surely on the number of abortions that happen every year. Places like California, New York, Maryland, where we know there's a high incidence of abortion, they are a black hole of information. But what we do know is that there are a lot of abortions happening, there are a lot of late-term abortions happening. And so some states, to their credit, have been able to step up and pass born-alive abortion survivor protection laws. And that's wonderful. We need that to be the case in all 50 states, which of course is why we need a federal policy to address that as well. What we also have is about a dozen states that have very specific reporting requirements where they actually publicize in their state health department reports how many babies survived an abortion. And I think we're still talking about a fairly small number of states, I think maybe 8 or so, that are actually doing this right now. But just in a 2-year period, we're hearing about 35 children who survived an abortion. We don't know exactly what happened to those children. Are some of them still with us today? We hope so. At minimum, we would hope that those children were offered the comfort of somebody to hold them, that maybe they were offered, pain management or something if they were too young to ultimately survive. And this is just in a handful of states in a couple of years that we have had all of these babies surviving abortions. And it's right there in black and white in these state health department reports. And so in the absence of a federal law, other states that have these born alive protections, they need to step up in their reporting requirements and make sure that we are capturing these instances. We need to ideally find out what is actually happening to these children. I mean, that would be just a bare minimum step that states could take right now. I will also flag that in Michigan, unfortunately, where they had their ballot measure to enshrine a so-called right to abortion in their state constitution, they are putting forth a package of radical pro-abortion bills, one of which is to actually repeal their born alive abortion survivors protection law. So now, not only does the pro-life movement have to play offense to try to provide these protections for unborn children, it's time to play defense too and try to make sure that these protections stay in place. And so it's a fight that we're going to have on multiple fronts, but educating people and making sure that they know that this is not a theoretical problem. I mean, how could it be when you were literally sitting right here? But I think for so many people, it's more comforting to think that this is a theoretical problem because the truth is much more horrible for us to really have to confront and address. But there are things that pro-life states can do right now to fill those gaps in their laws while we have, thankfully, strong pro-life leaders here in Congress pushing for those federal protections.
I want to illuminate kind of the piece that you were talking about as well about existing born alive laws when we know that very few states even have any reporting requirement. Minnesota is one state where that was repealed this year. So that was rolled back from a felony for failure to provide medical care to a misdemeanor. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what we see in those states where there is aggressive abortion legislation being introduced. So abortion through later term. And at the same time, those states are repealing born alive legislation. To me, that is not a coincidence.
Right. You know, we all know that after the Dobbs decision, there has been a campaign of massive resistance, both at the federal level and with the Biden administration and in the states. And quite frankly, in some of these states, what we've been seeing is a race to the bottom. How many pro-abortion policies can we possibly get? And, you know, frankly, just do the bidding of the abortion lobby. Unfortunately, we're seeing that happening in many states. One of the things that the abortion side is really focusing on is loosening the restrictions on the abortion pill, which we've touched on here. I want to make sure that people understand when women are taking these pills, not even knowing how far along in pregnancy they are, when these pills are, if the abortion lobby gets their way, available over the counter without having any sort of test to even find out if you're pregnant or not, just giving you these pills to have on hand, have them just in case. That's all part of their game plan. Just imagine how many more children could be potentially born alive after a failed abortion pill attempt. And so, you know, that makes the problem even bigger because it's not just the Planned Parenthood clinics that you're going to have these children born alive. It's not just the hospitals where you could have these children born alive. You're going to have a child, you know, born alive in someone's college dorm room, in their bathroom. And so it's a problem that's going to continue getting bigger and bigger if the abortion lobby has their way. And so again, it's great that the pro-life movement can go on offense in a lot of these states, but it's equally important that the pro-life movement makes sure that we're not ceding ground to the abortion lobby because they are going to be relentless pushing for those policies.
So when you think about gaps in reporting and policy, where we've been and where you see us needing to head, what would you say should be in the pro-life purview when it comes to policy right now?
Well, with the reporting, we, you know, at a bare minimum, we need to have an abortion survivor protection law, of course. We need to have those abortions reported, publicized by state health departments, you know, in a timely fashion, not like we have with the CDC where they're always a couple years out of date. We still haven't even seen the full scope of the Dobbs effect because the CDC is so far behind schedule. So there needs to be timely, accurate reporting, but we also need states who are doing that reporting to be sure to publicize those instances of children born alive. What happened to those children? Where are these children being born alive? Are all of the children born alive in Florida being born alive in this one Planned Parenthood clinic? That's kind of important for a state health department to know. So there are definitely ways that states can get specific in their reporting requirements. And frankly, it's something that needs to be incorporated into informed consent laws as well. Women need to know that there is a chance that their child is born alive. They need to know what their rights are. They need to know what is required of that medical
Correct.
provider, of everybody in the room, of what is going to happen. And so through the reporting, through the informed consent, I think there's definitely a lot of progress that states can make and the federal government.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you brought up that as an informed consent piece, because that's so important to us as well. We want mothers to understand that a live child is an outcome of an abortion, and we want moms to be provided quality medical care. We want moms to be provided quality mental health care. We want those babies to be provided quality medical care throughout that pregnancy and once they're born. And that's part of our mission as an organization, is that we provide support not just to abortion survivors, but to moms who need that support during a pregnancy and beyond, and attaching and bonding with their child, having better outcomes for families. For me, when I think about policy, that would be my challenge to the abortion lobby is, can we not agree? Can we not agree that women and babies deserve quality medical, mental health care and should be supported?
No, they can't.
We should all be able to agree, just like the Born Alive bill should be passing unanimously the very first time it was filed here in Congress, but unfortunately we continue having to have this debate.
Can't agree, because that would show what's inside of the womb, the human child.
So what would the next step be, Kristen? And then we'll let the
The
senator.
next step, well, I think it was interesting what Melanie was saying was so important about the reporting gaps, because 15% of chemical abortions fail to complete the abortion. So we're talking, I hadn't even thought about that. We're talking about tens of thousands of children being born alive, or a mother will have thought she has already aborted her child.
Correct.
That's going to lead to some catastrophic consequences, not only for these children, but for the mental health, the physical health that we're talking about of their mothers, especially if she doesn't seek any care because she's gotten the pills. They've been sent illegally to her from an abortionist in California, and she's in Wyoming, for example. So I think for us, our next step, though, we have to talk about how late-term abortions are real, how Democrats can't name one type of abortion they disagree with. There's no limit for them. And how precious children are being born alive. And I think highlighting the stories of abortion survivors is so key, because what Melanie was saying, when you're having these conversations with in-the-middle young people on this issue, or anyone who's in the middle, it sounds too ghastly. Of course these abortions don't happen. Of course none of this is happening. What you're talking about, I know Democrats support women and children. Why Democrats wouldn't vote against a bill to require an abortionist give, oxygen to a child who's suffocating, who's been born alive? You're crazy. And so I think we have to do a better job in our movement and really holding the mainstream media to account to talk about your story and the hundreds of abortion survivors ASN is really connected to and equipping and getting those folks out to the state capitals here in Washington, D.C., sharing their stories, say this is an actual problem. Here I am. And of course, the Democrats aren't going to be supportive of this, because any law that requires an abortionist to provide life-sustaining care to a child survives an abortion undermines, it weakens their entire position that abortion is nothing but a mere removal of cells. Any child who's born alive totally destroys the abortion lobby's entire narrative.
Melissa, I wanted to just talk about something that's near and dear to my heart for just a second. And, one is this a young lady who's 8 weeks pregnant and has the abortion pill. It's after that first pill they do tend to have that remorse. Or the later pregnancy is when they are given the prostaglandin. This is nothing we can't legislate up here. But we, as people who believe in the sanctity of life, have to be prepared and try to educate and be ready as well. But I just even want to step back even a little bit further from that. I can't imagine what it would be like to be 15 years old and pregnant. I can't imagine what it would be like to be 38 years old, a single mom, 2 kids in high school, and find out that you're pregnant. But I've taken care of both of those patients hundreds of times. And that we, again, the folks that believe in the sanctity of life, need to do more to support those folks and create this culture of acceptance. The first thing I tell a young lady who's 15, and they're there to my office really to say that someone's wants them to force an abortion upon them, but they don't want to do that. They just know intuitively it's not the right thing to do, and they make that decision. And I tell them, I'm going to be there with you. Mm-hmm. I've done this before. We're going to get you through this pregnancy. It's scary to be 15 and pregnant just physically, but we're going to get you through this. No, you don't have to have a C-section. I know you have nausea and vomiting, and you can't even go to school because you feel so horrible right now, but we're going to get you through this. I want you to know that I'm your friend. Mm-hmm. And after I talk about that, I tell them the most important thing that you can do for this baby is to finish high school. Mm-hmm. And that's not easy. It's not easy being 15 and pregnant. Maybe your mom is a single mom. Maybe she's working 12 hours a day. And that's where I need the Christian community and pro-life people to step up. We're not doing nearly enough. I can do my part as the obstetrician, but I can't be a full-time social worker. And that was my biggest frustration, is that there are organizations that help out there, but those folks need a friend. They need someone to help drive them to the doctor's visits. They need someone to maybe go to the food bank and get some groceries for them. They need to encourage them to finish school. The 38-year-old single mom that's living paycheck to paycheck, what can I do as an individual? What can we do as a church to wrap our arms around this person and not shun them? To not push them out of the church worship service and say, God welcomes you and this baby. And we know it takes more courage to keep this pregnancy than it would be to end this pregnancy as well. So that's my challenge, is how can we as a community show more compassion? And then after the baby's born, it's just starting. Right. Don't desert that 15-year-old or that 38-year-old woman after the baby's born. It's going to get harder. To breastfeed 3 times at night and then get up and go to school the next day, that's not easy. Mm-hmm. So I just want to encourage those of us that spend any time on this issue to say, what can we do to show compassion, to create this culture that we will take care of you and reward you for doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Kristen, I'm wondering if you would share those organizations, including your own, that fill in those gaps. That a lot of times, right, when we're hearing these arguments in our society that pro-lifers don't do enough, and I love the Senator's heart, because I think all of us believe we can always do more, right? That's our passion and our compassion for moms and children. But I think it's important that we highlight who we know is out there filling those gaps.
I think your point's very well taken. I think the challenge in our movement is not the lack of support, it's the lack of awareness of support. And of course, we hear this on campuses all the time. You pro-lifers care about children. What do you do for moms and babies? I'm like, here, do you have 5 hours? Because I can tell you all that we're doing. We door knocked 121,000 doors last year in 20 neighborhoods surrounding abortion facilities. 75% of the neighbors we spoke with had never heard of a pregnancy resource center or maternity home. They had no clue that the pro-life movement for the 49 years of Roe had been supporting and sustaining an entire social safety net. And that's my lecture to pro-life audiences, is we must do more to show her how much we care. Because, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so we have these resources out there. We have Heartbeat International. We have Human Coalition. You have Option Line. Students for Life, we have Standing With You, which any woman can go, put in her zip code, and be connected to public and private resources during the pregnancy and well after the pregnancy. You can go to findahealthcenter.hrsa.gov and be connected to more than 8,000 federally qualified health centers that we already fund in rural and urban neighborhoods and underserved communities that no one ever talks about. We talk about funding Planned Parenthood. Federally qualified health centers do everything, much more than what Planned Parenthood does, serves 21 million men, women in America. They do way more than Planned Parenthood. They just don't kill children. And so we have the resources. There are definitely gaps out there, but they are there. And we need to do a better job of advertising, supportafterabortion.com, standingwithyou.org, optionline.org, because we are providing resources, but we're not connecting to her. And that's why we're going door to door with our campaign for abortion-free cities of we have wagons filled with diapers and wipes and things that the pregnancy center has too much of, and we're going to doors and saying, hey, do you need something, by the way? We've got something here in our wagon we will give you right now. And by the way, this came from a local pregnancy center that's 5 miles from you, that is ready and willing to serve you and step alongside you and seek justice with you.
I just got to put an explanation part on what I see, though. More than an organization, they need a person.
Right. Right.
It's interesting to me when I take care of these, any mom, but there's usually a grandma or an auntie that's the difference maker. And we have to be proactive. Don't wait for them to ask. I guarantee you, you're a single mom at 38 years old and you have a new baby at home, you need the help. We have to identify those women and say, when you get home, here's your package, here's your welcome home package, and you need someone to babysit these other kids, I'm here for you. You need someone to take these teenagers to band practice. We need people, is what I'm begging for, is people, and develop a relationship. Take those women and those new babies to church. We need people stepping up and being proactive. They shouldn't be finding us. We should be finding them.
No, I love that. And that's where I want to end this time and lead to some Q&A, because that, again, is who we are as a movement, Senator, right? We care about the women and the children and their families for generations to come. And I think for me, what I often see, and I know everybody else is probably seeing the same thing, we have women who come to us and say, you know what, after I took the abortion pill and I wasn't sure if I was still pregnant or not, Planned Parenthood wouldn't answer the phone. And so where did they go? Well, they end up either finding us as an organization, or they are going back to a pregnancy center who first served them, loved them well. They knew that they would respond to them. And so, right, it's taking what we know to be true and finding those ways to continue to be there for those women. And the women are showing us how much that connection means to them.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of the community health centers too. Senator Sanders and I are working for more funding on them. We need to have a one-on-one relationship with those people, because there are godly men and women working in those facilities that are identifying these at-risk people. We need to be there proactively, ready to go. My goodness, 15-year-olds and breastfeeding. I mean, what an overwhelming task. And certainly the doctor, I don't teach breastfeeding, but my nurses did. And there's nurses in those centers as well. How do we empower? Let's build those relationships too.
Thank you. Any final comments before we go to Q&A?
Where's the Q&A coming from, the audience or from people online?
I have one. Melissa, what happens to a baby after the chemical abortion fails? Because it seems like if they're still pregnant, they have two choices. The mom has two choices. And if you want to repeat the question for the mic for the people at home.
We're still good on this mic alone for me. Thank you. The question was, what happens to a baby after a chemical abortion, the abortion pill fails? And we have seen so much of this after Roe was overturned. And we were expecting to see what we've already talked about today, which is the later in a pregnancy a woman is and she's taking the abortion pill, the greater the likelihood is going to be that a baby survives it. We were expecting that. What we weren't expecting was the overwhelming number of women who would reach out to us saying, I took the pill at 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, and weeks later, months later, I just found out I'm still pregnant. And I need to know, what have I done to my baby? What does the future look like for me? What am I supposed to do? Tell me what my baby's life might look like. And that's a very particular lane for us because we have these hundreds of survivors that we have served where we can say, let me tell you what we know from this population of survivors' lives. And yes, we have chemical abortion survivors and D&C and vacuum aspiration and dismemberment and saline, all those things. So what we have found is that so many women have so many questions about the outcomes for their babies. We know there's a huge literature gap when it comes to the outcomes for babies after failed chemical abortions. There's about 7 studies that I've seen over the years, but they're still very, very limited. So we want to fill in that research gap with our qualitative and our quantitative data. But what I can tell you is that, those women, that baby is at more risk than ever of being aborted again. That is something that we, I think, have instinctively always known in the pro-life movement, but we haven't been able to articulate. Because that woman who is taking the abortion pill and finding out she's still pregnant, typically she has the same socioeconomic factors that were driving her to abortion in the first place, right? Whatever it was that complication leading her to abortion, they're likely still there. And then you add on the trauma of the abortion pill, and then the shock and the trauma of finding out that it didn't work, and then the fear for their child's future. And then you add in, for these women that mostly we hear from these women, right? My OB is telling me I need to have another chemical abortion or go straight to a surgical abortion. And if the chemical abortion fails again this time, I'm definitely going to have a surgical follow-up. So we see, right, that the gestation timeline getting later and later, but the compounding trauma through that. So women need to know that babies can survive chemical abortions. Babies can go on to live healthy lives, that they deserve love and care and support, mental health-wise, medical-wise, that we serve moms and families in the long term because, right, this is not an easy process, right? Mom doesn't get to say, gosh, you know what, my chemical abortion the pill failed and I'm great. No, there's fear, there's uncertainty, there's grief, there's all of those things. And when baby is born, there's still grief. There's still questions. The questions shift a little bit, right? Of how do I tell my child? Will they ever know? Should I tell them? What do I tell them? How are they going to feel about me? But we can let women know those are all things that you don't have to go through alone. Yeah. We are here for you, and we will continue to be here for you. Yeah. So those babies could survive.
Yeah, I think as an obstetrician, the first thing I would want to do is a sonogram. So the most common cause of a failed chemical abortion is the wrong gestational age. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where we need our crisis pregnancy centers, whatever it takes just to establish the gestational age of the baby. And again, this is one piece of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. That's the opportunity for us to show how much we care, not how much we know. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's important. This would be, one of 100 factors that I would consider as I saw this patient coming to me with this little piece of history. But certainly I know that this patient's going to need some extra TLC, some counseling, some support. The community health centers, again, having the emotional support right there in the clinic is so important. Mm-hmm. Okay, good enough.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And please continue for a few more minutes.
Mm-hmm. Kristen, I'm going to get closer to you. Oh. Yeah.
It's kind of more of an ethical question. I know a lot of people, I'll ask this, no matter what the stage of the baby is, like, what if right up to the moment of birth, you obviously have, the baby has huge deformities, the baby's going to die within a few hours and suffer. What are some good talking points for people who may not see life as valuable at that point to that late-term abortion is still not an option that we should be thinking about in those scenarios?
Mm-hmm. Melanie, I see you nodding your head.
Even in cases where a child has, some sort of condition where we know that they are probably not going to be able to survive long, that child is still a human being with immeasurable worth, and they deserve better than being ripped apart limb by limb or killed when they're still in the womb and delivered, or all of these ways that abortionists work to try to kill the child beforehand. Even in these tragic, heartbreaking cases, which we unfortunately know absolutely happen, even in those cases, it is humane for us to let that child be delivered and feel the comfort of their mother's arms, even if it's just for an hour, to feel the comfort of a nurse's warm embrace, something. That is going to be infinitely better than killing that child ahead of time or leaving them on the cold, hard table to die alone. I don't think, any of us would deny that there are definitely cases where unfortunately a child is not going to survive. And we can acknowledge that, but we can also say, here are some solutions that honor that child's humanity, that provide that child comfort, that provide that child pain management. Nobody wants that child to suffer, however briefly. But we can do those hard things without attempting to deliberately kill that child. And from the limited data that we do have about things like perinatal hospice and palliative care, when women are offered that opportunity to be a mother, even however briefly after that child is born, they have better mental health outcomes compared to when they go through with an abortion procedure. And so that's another area where in these informed consent policies, we can do a much better job of educating women and families of what that road looks like. It is a hard and difficult road. We certainly don't want to diminish any of that, but it's an option that more women need to know about. Frankly, more doctors need to know about. Instead of immediately recommending an abortion procedure, they need to be telling women, hey, we've got perinatal hospice available to you. Hey, we've got pain management available to this baby. None of it is easy. These are difficult conversations. Every case is just a little bit different. But what we do know is that we have solutions that don't involve deliberately killing a child or potentially leaving them to suffer after a failed abortion.
I have a question here online. I'll ask you.
Okay.
So a question that I saw coming online from Natalie. I'm in Utah. I'm a busy mom of 2, and I plan to have more, but I want to help stop abortions and give love to struggling moms. How can I help?
Great question of how do I help? I always tell people the first place to start helping someone is looking around you, right? We all want to make a difference, but it starts with opening our eyes to the people that are in our church, in our school, in our family, in our community. I've even asked Kristen, people sometimes, hey, when's the last time you held the door open for someone? I know this sounds weird to say in this context, but think about it. When is the last time you've held the door open for somebody? When is the last time you smiled and made eye contact with somebody that you don't know? So we start there, right? And we open our eyes and we see the people right in front of us. It means that we start by also educating ourselves to know what our pregnancy centers are in town, who our pro-life doctors are in our community, who our resources and supports are. So all of those things. And then plugging yourself into the gaps that you see. But we have to have conversations with the people in our community to know who's there and what gaps exist.
Yeah, and I would plug abortionfreecities.org. That's a great website it's more of our alumni outreach at Students for Life, so not students, but taking what we do on campuses, having conversations, providing support, and doing that in communities, going and knocking on doors, downloading a church kit. What the senator said before he left was so important about
every woman, especially young women in crisis, young girls who are pregnant, do need that one person. When we look at statistics, when I talk to women who've chosen life or have chosen abortion, what always comes down in all those stories is one person. The young women who had huge obstacles, who chose life, was because they found one person in their life who said, you don't have to do this and I'm going to be there with you. But the women who chose abortion never found that person. So we have these church kits. You can download Abortion Free Cities, it's free, whatever. But the goal is to get churches and parishes talking about this issue, of people in the parish, in the congregation, raising their hand saying, come to me. Come to me. There is, you can ask me anything. You can ask me for help, and getting us to really be those hand raisers. Do you want to read another question from online? Is there any question? Okay. So this one came in. How do we debunk the awful misinformation? Is there any accountability for those biased medical professionals? I asked.
Well, sometimes I think it's worth highlighting that even the pro-abortion medical professionals are sometimes making our arguments for us. This is something that Senator Marshall touched on earlier about how so often women don't even realize how far along in a pregnancy they are. That's why the American College of OBGYNs highlights that.
Right.
In their practice bulletins, they say, hey, about 50% of women are going to be off by, several weeks or more of how far along in pregnancy they are. So you should be doing ultrasounds to determine that. You should be doing ultrasounds at that first intake appointment to rule out ectopic pregnancy. There's all of these things that on our side we would say, yes, you're right. That is true. We agree with you. So why is all of that no longer true in the abortion context and only in the abortion context? So, sometimes it's just simple as that, of pointing out how they are treating abortion differently because of ideology, not because of what is best for women and what is best for babies. Again, to sound like a broken record, it is so important that we have better reporting requirements at the state and the federal level. We do have limited data, and that is very, very helpful as we're having all of these discussions. But at the same time, we also don't know what we don't know. And so there is absolutely more that states can be doing in particular, and the federal government as well, to make sure that we are getting this information. Again, as I kind of mentioned earlier, if we've got one Planned Parenthood facility that is having repeat failed abortions, that's kind of important for a state health department to know. That should be triggering some, red flags and additional oversight. And we know that once health departments can actually come in and start taking a look at some of these abortion facilities, they start uncovering a whole host of other problems too. And so, through that power of oversight, I think there's a lot more progress that can be made, but we have to have that data coming in on the front end too, not just for the believability factor, but to be able to have a way to go in and actually address some of these problems.
And I would add to that as well. I'm a huge data and reporting person, but Kristen, you touched on this point as well. It's also about highlighting the stories of people who can personify what this means. So for too many people in the abortion industry and lobby has hidden behind this, very voiceless, faceless type of procedure, right? Not a person. And so that's where the Abortion Survivors Network has been such a huge piece of this puzzle, is sharing the voices, the stories, the faces of those who survived abortions. And you know as well as I do what that looks like on social media. People either love it or they hate it, right? The common response to survivors, people ask me this a lot, well, how do people respond to you? The response typically is, we're not talking about you. How dare you use a survivor's story to push your agenda, restricting women's reproductive rights?
That's my lived truth. That's how you respond to that.
Yeah, I have a lived truth too, right, as a survivor. But I think therein lies that importance, right, of how do we make some progress in this conversation, the continued arguments that aren't grounded in truth and data, that like to continue to keep certain stories and conversation, we are now in a place where we have to elevate the voices of not just survivors, but women who are experiencing abortions that fail, or they stop it, or they reverse it, men who are impacted by it, family members who have experienced this over generations. There are so many stories. So for me, that is a big way we debunk things.
Yeah.
And we serve people, right? Before they can share their story, they need to be served. One of the reasons why we haven't heard a lot from women like my biological mom over the years, because there was nowhere before we came along for them to receive specialized healing. But we're in this new world where we can do this. I think we're good. Thank you so much, everybody, and for everyone who tuned in online.